we should deal with this issue through the World Trade Organization of protecting the intellectual property rights of the drug companies.
Over the weekend on NBC's Meet the Press, Bernie Sanders called out America's major moral failing concerning vaccine distribution. Meanwhile, a close Biden ally disgustingly defended that moral failing. Now, this is all over the intellectual property rights on the vaccines. I'll get to more on this after the clip.
Obviously, the virus is pretty out of control in India. It's not in good shape in Brazil. These are two pretty big countries that could have an impact on us, both our health and our economy. Our vaccine distribution, we have a lot here. Should we start sharing it faster than we are now, particularly when you see what's going on in our hemisphere and in India? Should we be more aggressive here? It seems like we've been a bit, some might argue, overly cautious about our vaccine supply.
Well, I think a couple of things, Chuck. The answer is yes. I think we've got to obviously make sure that every American gets vaccinated as quickly as possible. But I do think not only do we have a moral responsibility to help the rest of the world, it's in our own self-interest. Because if this pandemic continues to spread in other countries, it's going to come back and bite us at one point or another. But the second thing we should do is not only make sure that excess vaccines in the United States get around to countries that need it, we should deal with this issue through the World Trade Organization of protecting the intellectual property rights of the drug companies. And I think what we have got to say right now to the drug companies, when millions of lives are at stake around the world, yes, allow other countries to have these intellectual property rights so that they can produce the vaccines that are desperately needed in poor countries. There is something morally objectionable about rich countries being able to get that vaccine, and yet millions and billions of people in poor countries are unable to afford it.
Now, I'll get to the Biden ally who's on the wrong side of this issue in a minute here. First, of course, Bernie Sanders is exactly right. We need to vaccinate the world. The only way to do that quickly is to waive the IP rights on these vaccines so that these vaccines can be mass produced. You have a situation now where there are constant mutations of COVID-19, all these variants. There will continue to be new variants up to the point where you will eventually have a variant, if this goes long enough, that will be so effective that it will render the current vaccines ineffective. So if you've already been vaccinated and you think you're good, well, if the rest of the world is not vaccinated within about a year, experts warn, there will be a new variant of the vaccine that will render of COVID-19 that will render your vaccine ineffective. So this isn't just a fairy tale. I've covered this before from March 30th. Experts warn failure to rapidly vaccinate the world creates dangerous opening for COVID-19 mutations. Quote, we need a people's vaccine, not only to protect people in the world's poorest countries, but to ensure that people all over the world who've already been vaccinated aren't put at risk again. This is a warning from 77 leading epidemiologists from 28 countries. 2/3 said they believe the international community has a year or less before COVID-19 mutations proliferate widely enough to make a majority of first-generation vaccines ineffective, requiring the production of new or modified shots. Yet, of course, Big Pharma, Chamber of Commerce, other business leaders have influenced the U.S., the U.K., and Canada to the point where they are against the WTO waiving the TRIPS agreement, which is the IP protection on these vaccines. In fact, this is 3 countries against 100 plus. So despite garnering support from more than 100 countries, the waiver push has run up against opposition from powerful nations such as the US, the UK, and Canada, which have thwarted the will of a supermajority of WTO member nations in order to ensure that pharmaceutical corporations retain monopoly control over coronavirus vaccine technology. So despite there being more than 100 countries that want to see these the IP waived, you have the US, UK, and Canada having more control within the World Trade Organization and not allowing the IP waiver on these vaccines. Now, this is where we get to Joe Biden's close ally. So from Washington Post here, other lawmakers who oppose the waiver warn that loosening the protections would harm the nation on the global stage. Chris Coons, a close ally of Biden, has even invoked the January 6th storming of the Capitol among the reasons to protect patents, saying it revealed the need to unite the country. Quote, all of this is a wake-up call for us that we need to have another Sputnik-like moment of reinvestment in American innovation and competitiveness. Coons added that added at a think tank event last week. Quote, a central part of being successful in this competition is continuing with our constitutionally created protected property right of a patent. This is so ridiculous on so many levels. First of all, you have a situation right now where Russia and China are beating the U.S. at vaccine diplomacy. Although Beijing and Moscow deny it, experts say they are beginning to see how the strategy of selling or donating their vaccines abroad is allowing them to expand their influence. So even if you want to take on Chris Coons' worldview that, oh, it's good for the U.S. to retain the patents on these vaccines, well, Russia and China are sharing their vaccines all over the world. And what do you think that does? That helps their relationship with those other countries, separating them from the U.S. So if you really care, if you care about, U.S. dominance worldwide, then you would want to be sharing these vaccines all over the world for free. Yet here you have Russia and China doing that. Now, of course, the other issue here is this is not the space race. This is a virus. So by not allowing the IP to be waived on these vaccines, you are only ultimately hurting yourself once a new variant pops up that renders the current vaccines ineffective. On top of that, the other issue here is that these vaccines weren't all created in the U.S. You have BioNTech, which is a German company. So this is not just about, U.S. dominance, even if you want to view it that way, because you have other countries that have helped to develop these vaccines. But ultimately, this entire comment is so stupid because you're only hurting yourself. Even if you don't care at all about other people in other countries, first of all, you got problems. But second of all, it's ultimately going to come back to hurt you. The only way forward here is to waive the patents on these vaccines, allow other countries to mass produce them, and sure, make it a temporary waiver. Whatever needs to be done in the moment to ensure that these vaccines are mass produced and people are covered before a new mutation pops up that renders the current vaccines ineffective.